Hello and welcome to the St. Louis Wind Symphony podcast. My name is Matt McKeever.
And I'm Lisa McMahon.
And we're both members of the St. Louis Wind Symphony. In this podcast, Lisa and I will highlight, discuss, and listen to pieces that will be featured on upcoming Wind Symphony concerts.
Established in 1998, the St. Louis Wind Symphony is a non-profit, all-volunteer concert band dedicated to preserving and performing quality wind band music, supporting music education, and commissioning new works.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the St. Louis Wind Symphony podcast.
Hello and welcome to the St. Louis Wind Symphony's podcast. My name is Lisa McMahon. I'm here with Matt McKeever. Matt, say hello to people.
Hello.
We are practicing our social distancing because we are still under quarantine, but we thought we would get together and do a virtually get together, do a podcast, talk band, because that's what we do. I did want to address a couple of things that may have been on our concert slated for this summer. Obviously, like so many things involving live performances at this moment in our history, we're taking things just 1 week at a time while we are anxious to get back on stage and play for you and for each other. We are, of course, going to wait until it's safe for both our audience and our musicians to do so. So in the meantime, we wanted to follow up our last podcast where we spoke about our individual top three pieces. I stated my own personal top three, and Matt stated his top three. We are chatting today about what selections have stood out for our musicians. Tom Poshak, our music director, sent out a questionnaire to our musicians to say, well, what are your top three pieces, and tell us a little bit about why. And so we have some of those results, and we're going to chat about them a little bit here. Matt, before I talk about the first one, you've got the information from Tom. Can you talk a little bit about how it was scored or what the order is or anything along those lines? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, so I think what we did was we sent out a list. Tom keeps a list of everything that we've played over the 20 plus year history of the Wind Symphony, and he sent this list to everybody and said, hey, just vote on like your top three, give like a first choice, second choice, third choice of your favorite pieces. And I think from there he put a score to that. So if they chose it as, or sort of a point system, so if they chose it as their first choice, it got 3 points. If they chose it as their second choice, it's got 2 points, third choice, 1 point, and then just sort of add up all the points together. And we ended up with sort of a top five of what everybody chose. So that's what we're going to talk about today is that top five.
Some are surprising. Some things are on here that I personally don't care for at all. But for sure, the top two are not a shock at all. So I'm going to talk about this was undisputed number one, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So number one is Lincolnshire Posy by Percy Grainger. Not going to be a shock to absolutely anybody. I will say that the comment, I think this is a comment from Tom, is that it is pretty obvious that the trombones and French horns made their choices by how good their individual parts are.
It's true.
So if it's a great important part, then
part of what Tom did here is he sent this out to everybody and they could add comments. So he sent us a list of all the comments, and as you're going through the comments, it's like, oh man, this horn part is killer. Oh, the trombones,
right.
Like, okay, horns and trombones clearly have strong feelings about their parts. While the rest of us are just like, this is a good piece of music. The horns are like, I couldn't care if it's a terrible piece of music.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
We love it.
No, it's not wrong. Some of the other band comments on this one, that this is Grainger at his very best. And It's a great piece, and it's always fun for the audience as well as the ensemble. Matt, that's something that you and I talk about a lot, something that's fun to play versus fun for the audience. We talk about that a lot. And one of the pieces that's on this list is exactly the opposite. It's really good for the band, and band people like it. But as an audience member, if you're not a classically trained musician, it's kind of a hard thing to listen to. We'll talk about that later. That is not Lincolnshire Posy. So this piece came out published I think in 1937. And it's interesting when you talk about the premiere, because it sounds, by all accounts, the premiere of this work was not well received, probably because of how stinking hard this piece is. And the group that premiered it was not a group of professional musicians. It was essentially a community band, but it would have been members of a union. So it was the Milwaukee Symphonic Band, which is a group composed of members from bands including the Blatz Brewery and Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer Factory worker bands.
That's my favorite part about this piece. When I read that, I'm like, this is so great. It's a bunch of beer factory workers performing.
Who premiered this, yes.
Performing the absolute seminal work for a concert band was performed by a bunch of guys who work in a beer factory. And that's so perfect in some way. It's so, I don't know.
If you could be a musician and then also work in a brewery, Matt, don't sit there and pretend that you wouldn't do that.
It's true. I tell you, all joking aside, community bands and like union bands and that was a really big deal,
Yes.
back in the early 20th century. I mean, every company had, I did part of my master's work on this. Every company had a community band, and like they would sometimes rehearse in the evenings, or they'd rehearse right in the middle of the workday as like a way to sort of like let off steam. Like everybody played in the band, if you, any big company like McDonnell Douglas or something, like these companies all had bands and they would play together, or like the firemen all had a band, the policemen had a band, every sort of union-based organization had their own band. And that's where like bands really caught on. So this was just the fact that it was performed by this union of beer factory workers, I think is just a sign of its time, around this time period in band history. This is where most band music was performed, was with these types of groups. And I think that's really cool and funny.
Maybe we should contact Monsanto and say, hey, what are your thoughts about having a Monsanto workers symphonic band?
I'm sure there's still some out there, probably not many, but
yeah. And, well, anyway, that's the type of group that would have premiered this, and it's kind of ironic because it's considered one of the more difficult pieces for wind ensemble. Again, not even just individual parts, but putting it all together. Because in typical Granger style, there's so much going on. There's all these counter melodies and just interesting harmonies that are happening all over the place, and Granger-isms, as it were. But it does kind of bring in a question that Matt and I were talking about before we started today. Is this a great example of Granger as a composer, or is this expert example of Granger as an arranger? Because all 6 movements of this particular piece are based off of English folk songs, or his bunch of wildflowers, as he referred to the folk singers who he collected the performances of. They're not original melodies at all, and this is just his setting of it. And that's probably part of why Movement 3, the Rifford Park Poachers, and Movement 5, which is the Lord Melbourne movement, they're all very, not atonal, they're just very out of time, and they're very arrhythmic, and they're very, very difficult in terms of timing, because he really tried to keep the original phrasing and the original cadence of what folk singers did. And they were, by and large, not trained singers. They were people that were, farmers. So,
and I think, the most fascinating thing about this, I think, is and what makes this, yes, it's an arrangement. I mean, these are arrangements of these people's songs, but what really allows Granger to put his personal spin on this is that he crafts the songs, the feel of the song, the style, the way that he orchestrates and the way that he pairs instruments and tempos and feels. All of that is based on what he calls the musical portrait of the singer who sang it. So, you can only imagine when you listen to certain pieces, what those people, you can almost see what those people look like based on what the song sounds like, and we'll get to this in a second, but we actually have original recordings of these people singing these songs. And sometimes that almost even validates what you hear in the music. Like, wow, the person who sang that sounds what I thought they, sounded like, or what they looked like based on what I heard in the piece of music. So in that sense, that's what really makes this piece brilliant is he's painting a musical portrait of who these people are, not only the songs that they sang, but what they were like and their personalities were like. So it's incredible.
Part of how Granger came up with the original source material for this is kind of fascinating. He's just a fascinating person. Matt, you and I both teach middle school, so we have to be careful when we are talking about Granger.
You can't talk about everything.
You can't even say go on the internet and find out what you can about Granger, because that goes down a very, very strange rabbit hole in a hurry. But one of the interesting things about how he collected these folk tunes was with the old wax cylinders and the recording equipment itself. It weighed a ton, and he had it strapped to his back, went through the English countryside and talked to all these folk singers who just knew all these songs because he recognized it as a dying art form. So he wanted to get it recorded. So he took this extraordinarily heavy piece of recording equipment and all these blank wax cylinders and just walked around the English countryside and had people sing into this recording device. And that was his original source material for it. Matt, are we going to listen to one of the wax recordings?
Yeah, so we'll these wax recordings are available. They're actually they were shared online by the Navy band. So we'll listen to. I think Lisa and I both agreed that Horkstyle Grange is kind of the linchpin of the entire piece. So we're going to listen to the original wax cylinder version of that piece as it was sung to Granger, and then we'll follow that up right after that with a section of, hopefully the same section of the Granger's Lincolnshire Posy that basically arranges that same song. So we can hear sort of the contrasting differences between what Granger heard and then what he basically
what he made from that source material. Yeah.
So it'll be kind
of interesting tidbit about the second movement, Matt. I shared this with you earlier. As a flute and piccolo player myself, when I have played this piece, the piccolo doesn't play the entire first movement. And in fact, movement 3 is this strange woodwind quintet of sorts, depending on the version that you're playing, but it's piccolo is in that. So I personally believe that the only reason that piccolo plays on movement 2 is just because they're getting ready to play this big exposed thing in movement 3, and he didn't want them to go into that cold. So movement 2, first time piccolo is added. We're listening to the original wax recording and then what Granger made of it.
Yep, here it is.
You know, so grandfather, listen on my ear. You all don't know in the garbage there. The chimney's mumbles, lamps unfolding, there below one laugh is there. Whiskey gun will be into her. Whiskey will be my friend. Young golden deeds will be remembered, golden deeds without so grand.
All right, you just heard the original wax recording of the second movement of Percy Granger's Lincolnshire Posy, followed by Percy Granger's actual arrangement of that from Lincolnshire Posy. So hopefully you enjoyed hearing that contrast between those two pieces. The next piece we're going to talk about is a piece we actually talked about at length in our previous podcast where we shared our top 3. It was in my top 3. I think it was actually number 1. And that was First Suite in E Flat by Gustav Holst. So this was another choice by the band of one of their top pieces to play. And frankly, it doesn't surprise me because it's my top favorite, and it's up there with Lincolnshire Posy sort of as one of the top works ever written for a band. It's a piece that's not only fun to play, it's fun to listen to. It's got 3 movements. I am partial to the first movement, but because we listened to that last time, we can maybe listen to something from the second or third movement. But anyway, I don't want to take a lot of time to talk about this piece other than say, if you haven't listened to it, if you're new to band music, it's a great introduction to band music. It's not as, it's maybe a little bit more
accessible.
Yeah, sure, accessible. That's what I was looking for. A little more accessible than maybe some of the other stuff on this list. And it's really a prime example of sort of your quintessential band piece. It's got a march in there. It's got some old folk song things, and all the stuff that we think of when we associate with band music. It's all in there. And this is, sort of that archetypal piece that so much of band music has been built around. So again, if you want to hear our full thoughts on it, go back to the last podcast, and I sort of waxed poetic about this one for probably about 10 minutes. So I'm not going to do that again. So
we could easily do an entire podcast just on First Suite, and we could easily do an entire podcast on Lincolnshire.
We could, totally.
It doesn't surprise me at all that those end up being number 1 and number 2 from our musicians. There's a reason for that. Yeah, there's a reason.
And in fact, I just realized this. Our podcast introduction is the beginning of the second movement.
Yes, it is.
So we've heard everything. So let's go ahead and give you a little bit of the third movement. I think I'm actually going to give you the because it doesn't get any better than that. That's such a great melody. So anyway, let's listen to a little bit of the third movement of Gustav Holst's First Suite in E flat.
So that was the third movement of Gustav Holst's First Suite in E flat for military band, Matt's all-time favorite piece, of course. And Matt's actually going to talk about the next piece, which I believe was number 3. Is that correct?
I believe so. So we had a little bit of a scoring controversy here. I looked at the score sheet that Tom sent me, and in fact, the piece that had the third ranked number of points was Danzón number 2 by Arturo Marquez. It wasn't on Tom's list, so hopefully I'm not messing up the list here, but I don't mind talking about this piece anyway because I really like it. So again, Danzón number 2 by Arturo Marquez. Most specifically, the band version was arranged by Oliver Nichols. So a little bit about this piece. It's originally an orchestral composition by Arturo Marquez, who is Mexican. It is one of the more popular and frequently performed orchestral Mexican contemporary classical pieces of music. I was first introduced to this, and I think a lot of people were introduced to this piece of music when Gustavo Dudamel was conducting this with the Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra. This is his youth group that he sort of started and sort of swept the nation. This whole Simón Bolívar Music Academy just started over in Venezuela, started sort of sweeping the nation. Everybody started hearing about these young musicians under the baton of Gustavo Dudamel doing these incredible things. Dudamel now, obviously, the musical director of the LA Philharmonic, but at this time he was working with these young people back in the early 2000s, and they toured Europe and America, and they played this song, and it just sort of became this smash hit in the orchestral world. And it's got some really cool solo parts. It starts off with this really awesome clarinet solo that is just like, it is what every clarinet player wants to play. It's got some great oboe parts, piano parts, violin, horn, trumpet, flute, piccolo. Everybody gets a little piece of this. And it's just such a seminal work for orchestra now. I guess you could call it sort of a modern standard of orchestral rep. But it was eventually arranged by Oliver Nichols for band and has really started to get super popular with band. I know just within the last 10 or 15 years, it's consistently performed at things like the Midwest Clinic or, big festivals or big organizations, are playing this piece because, and it's really become sort of a modern contemporary piece. So it definitely has sort of this Mexican flair to it. Some of the stuff I found on it, it says this staple of contemporary Mexican music literature expresses and reflects on the dance style named danzón, which has its origins in Cuba, but it's a very important part of the folklore of the Mexican state of Veracruz. The music was inspired by a visit to a ballroom in Veracruz. So I personally, to give you a little personal information, I was actually introduced to this piece by a student, a high school student. And she said, I heard this piece. I think it's really cool. It's got a really cool clarinet part. Would you be able to find the clarinet part for me? And I did. I was able to find that for her and let her take a look at that. But then I sort of went down the YouTube rabbit hole as we do. And I saw the recording of Dudamel doing this with his group and saw other people playing it. And like the cool thing about this is when Dudamel plays this with his groups, like the audience is like up and dancing and cheer. It is like raucous. It is like everybody's up dancing. It's not like anything you'd expect to see at, Powell Hall. But these people get really into this piece of music. I thought it was so cool to see people up in their seats dancing and people on the stage moving with the music. It's just very impassioned piece of music, and very, very fun for the listener, and fun for the performers as well. So anyway, I've actually, to be honest, I've never performed this piece. I wasn't in the Wind Symphony when they performed this. And I guess, Lisa, you were.
Yes. So it was not this recent time that we performed at our state convention, but the time, before that, 5 years ago or whatever it was. We performed it, it would have been in January, but then it was on our concert program that season. Yeah.
I want to say, and I don't quote me on this, but I want to say there's a YouTube video on our YouTube page of the band performing this. There's a lot of videos of the band performing. I apologize, I don't know who, but someone recorded a bunch of videos of the band back in like the mid 2000s or like mid to late. I want to say like 2008, 2009, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'd have to ask Tom.
But I'm pretty sure there's a video of the band performing this piece. So if you want to check out the Wind Symphony playing it, you can. It's on YouTube. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, really cool piece. Super fun.
I was surprised that this was on the list.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised too, because it's definitely not considered, standard, I don't think, yet, of band music. I think it's becoming a standard of band music. And,
sure.
and the fact that it was performed probably 7 or 8 years ago, it's cool that people still remember it as a piece that they really like. So, yeah. So anyway, check out this recording. If we have the Wind Symphony version available, we'll play that one for you. Otherwise, we'll play some other random band playing it. I'll have to find it. But enjoy this recording of Arturo Marquez's Danzón No. 2.
All right, that was Danzón No. 2. I believe that was number 3 on our list. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about. Is this number 4? This one was a tie. Is that right?
It was a tie. It was a tie with this and the one that's after this.
Okay, so tie for 4th place, Symphony in B flat for band by Paul Hindemith. Not surprising to me at all that this was on the list. This was written by Paul Hindemith in 1951 during his time he was in the United States. Premiered in April of that year by the Purging Zone. I do want to read one of the reviews by revered bandmaster Richard Franco Goldman. I think it's very telling of just band music at the time. There was this big perception that band music wasn't necessarily a serious art form yet, although that thought was already spearheaded by composers like Sousa and Granger, or arrangers like Granger, depending on your thoughts on him. People had already seen wind ensemble music as a viable artistic vehicle, but I think a lot of people in the quote-unquote serious classical world were still, they hadn't bought in yet. And unfortunately, Symphony in B-flat kind of falls in that same time frame. Goldman himself says he called the piece singularly dead. Wow. He states that composing for band is difficult because the instrumentation is irrational and exasperating.
Yeah.
And part of that is this is also the time period where you start to see works for quote unquote symphonic bands that are really meant for these gigantic 60, 70, 80 piece bands. And so they just get very bombastic and they're very, very heavy. A lot of pieces that are specifically written for a symphonic band at this time, they're written for these type of ensembles. And so when we talk about that instrumentation being irrational and exasperating, that's not incorrect.
No, totally.
That's a huge, if you've ever been in front of a band of 100, yeah, like it's a little bit Yeah, it's a lot.
Exasperating.
Exasperating. It's irrational and exasperating. This is also right before Fred Fennell founded the Eastman Wind Ensemble. So that was an example of high art being created by a wind ensemble, well, of any type, that was very pared down and one on a part and very, very clean and just, very, very simple. This is sort of the opposite of that. This is the thing that sort of tipped over to that. So it's interesting that a piece that like this that is revered was kind of reviled at the time that it premiered.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because the Eastman Wind Ensemble hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Comments from the band: a very well crafted piece and one of the most significant pieces in the wind repertoire. It is not an audience favorite, but is one of the landmark works for wind band. Very challenging for musicians, and then probably my favorite comment from the band: not sure it is as great of an experience for the listeners. And that's we talk a lot about things that are fun to play versus, or in addition to being fun for the audience. This is not that piece.
Yeah.
It's difficult because there's a little bit atonal and a lot of dissonant chords, non-harmonic tones. It preserves the neoclassical tonality. So it does basically have a fast, slow, fast form. And the last movement, the third movement, is the fugue, which is what we're going to listen to here in just a second.
Mm-hmm.
And there's identifiable ostinatos and repeated melodies and that sort of stuff. So it's very classical in terms of form, and it's very easily identified as such. But the tonalities are not very sing-alongable, if you will.
Sure. I think I kind of call music like this. It's thinking man's music. You really got to think about it. You can't just sit back and go, all right, here we go. Let it wash over me. It's not the lighthearted comedy of band music. It's more kind of like the Christopher Nolan movie that really makes you think, So, or like a really intense drama. It's certainly not something that you should just sit back and just relax. It's going to take you for a ride, and parts of it you'll like, and parts of it you won't like. And sometimes you'll want to get off the ride, but once you get to the end, you're like, wow, that was something. Well,
I mean, it is funny because I think seasoned band musicians will, if you pass this out the first time, you go, oh, this is in B flat. This will be easy. Everything's in B flat. But, it's B flat major, it's B flat minor, it's B flat.
It's merely a suggestion.
It's merely, yes. The tonality is implied rather than enforced.
It's definitely an example of art music, music that is to be enjoyed, yes, but also studied and analyzed and sort of dissected, as opposed to just like something you just listen to for fun. So I mean,
rational and exasperating.
Yes, exactly. Very irrational. So I mean, if that's your type of thing, you'll love it. If you've never heard it, if it's not your type of thing, it's definitely still worth listening to, just to be like, wow, this is one of the pieces for. If you're into band music, I mean, it's something you should listen to and something you should play. And it's really hard to play too.
Yes, it is. It's difficult.
It's super challenging. So I personally really enjoyed performing this piece when we did. I want to say it was about 2 or 3 years ago. And I really enjoyed it. And I didn't know the piece. And I'm so glad I played it. So glad I know it. And in fact, when we were putting together our top 3, I'd say this was probably 5 or 6 for me. It was pretty darn close to the top. And you just, man, what an epic work.
Cool. Let's listen to a little bit of the third movement of this. This is Paul Hindemith's Symphony in B flat for band, premiered in 1951. This is movement 3, which is the fugue. All right, that was the third movement from Paul Hindemith's Symphony in B flat for band, and Matt is going to tell us about the piece that what you just heard tied with. This one makes my brain hurt, how these two things can be tied. But Matt, what do we have for slot 4, which is kind of like slot 5?
Yeah.
What do we have?
Yeah, so tied for 4th place as the piece that members of the Wind Symphony enjoyed playing the most is Symphonic Dances from West Side Story. This is a suite written by Leonard Bernstein that he wrote based on the music from the very popular hit musical West Side Story. So this particular version was arranged for band by Paul Lavender. So Bernstein wrote out this suite. I believe it was, let me double check and make sure I got this right. I don't know. I'm not sure.
1961.
61. Okay. Yeah. It was very shortly after West Side Story came out that he did the arrangement of Symphonic Dances. In fact, I think I saw that it's actually on, it says the suite was included as a bonus track on 1957 is what it says. The suite was included as a bonus track on the 1957 original Broadway cast recording. Mm-hmm. So the suite was written by Bernstein as a way to just perform the instrumental parts of West Side Story without any singing, and just sort of like it sort of all seamlessly blends together so that it's not nearly as long as West Side Story, but you get all the meat and potatoes of the good musical parts. So again, this version was.
Does that mean that it came out on the 57 cast recording, but then it wasn't released as its own standalone piece of orchestral music until 1961? Is that what I'm understanding?
That's possible. Yeah, I would. Yeah. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I don't know the exact ins and outs, but that's very possible that it was on there and then maybe it was released to the public in 61. So I don't know. But anyway, this arrangement was by Paul Lavender for band, and it's a real doozy. I would say I'm pretty sure this is a grade 6, and it lives
in all parts, not just it like every individual part. From flute 2 all the way down. Everything is a grade 6. It's just hard.
Yeah. So I remember this piece distinctly as this. We performed this early on in my Wind Symphony career, and I remember it as the first piece that I really had to work on this one. Like I really had to go home and practice this one consistently to have it ready for the performance because it was really hard. And there's a lot of changing of styles as any sort of like suite or medley or anything like that has, as you're moving between these different scenes and different styles of music, there's a lot of push and pull with the tempo and changing of tempos. And it was all very fluid. And there's just a lot of focus that needed to happen with the band. So in case you've been living under a rock, you don't know anything about West Side Story. The music is particularly important in the history of American music because it blends jazz, Latin rhythms, symphonic music, all sort of together into this one thing. And it definitely is, I think a lot of people would agree, it's Bernstein's seminal work, though he's written a lot of great music that's been adapted for band. We actually just did a piece last season, Overture to Candide, that was another Bernstein transcription. So, it's a really incredible work that incorporates so many different styles of music. In fact, this particular suite has 9 different movements. It's got the prologue, Somewhere, very famous song, Scherzo, Mambo, Cha-Cha, Meeting Scene, Cool, which is another very popular song from West Side Story, a Fugue, the Rumble, and the finale. And I think in total, this piece, I don't remember the exact length of time, but I remember it being somewhere around like 25 minutes to perform this entire piece of music. And if I remember my sheet music correctly, it was at least 800 measures.
At least, yes.
So I use this example a lot to my students, especially my beginning students. The first time we pull out a song that's more than 8 measures long, they're like, wow, this seems really long. You think that's long? Played at 800.
Nothing, kids. This is nothing.
Wait till you get to be a professional like me, because these songs are long. So I just remember this being a really long piece of music, but it's not boring. It's not uninteresting.
No, not at all.
It takes you for a ride, and it's a long ride, but it's super enjoyable. So the one comment I saw from the band that we had from a band member says, this piece really stretched us as a group and as individual players, and it's great music. So it isn't that everything you want from a piece of band music anyway, to really stretch you as a musician, but then to also be really enjoyable for you and especially for the audience. I mean, this is that audience members know all the music from. So it's a win-win for everybody. And a fun fact about this one, we performed this in Kansas City. I think was it a joint concert with the North Winds band?
Yes, it was a joint. Yes, it was a joint concert with North Winds in Kansas City, and then I think it was the following year, or maybe it was the year before. They actually came to St. Louis to do the same sort of thing. So this was a little bit of an exchange concert for both of them.
Yeah. It was cool too, because I at that time I had my band that I'm the director of. We were in Kansas City for a festival, and my kids were able to come to the performance in Kansas City, which was really cool. So that it has some significance to me too, because I just remember that as a good time. But it was cool to see this on this list. I was a little bit surprised that a transcription would end up on this list. Well,
there's a few transcriptions that are on this. John's On is a transcription.
Yeah.
For me, this piece is the piece that made me regret that I told anybody in the Wind Symphony that I play piano. Like this is the piece that I was like, man, I really wish that I had kept that skill to myself.
Yeah.
And not just because the piano part is difficult, but also this was the first time in what has become a very long pattern of behavior for me that I was playing multiple instruments and having to switch around a lot within a piece or within a concert. The keyboard parts for this, there are keyboard parts that are covering string patches, and then later on I was covering a vibraphone. So I remember that when we performed this, I was sitting at the piano, but then I had a keyboard that was right off to the side, and there wasn't enough time to either switch music or actually get up to move to the other one. So I was just kind of scooting around, that.
You were sort of Paul.
There was a lot happening in this.
You're sort of Paul Schafering your way around the band, like you're
pretty much. And this was the first time that I had really done that particular thing. I had played as a pianist in Wind Symphonies previous to this, but this is the first time that I was actually covering a lot of multiple things, and having to remember, make sure this is on, make sure this patch is working, check the volume of this. I do it all of the time now, and it's nothing wrong with that, but this was the first, what a heck of a way to be introduced to having that skill, The first time that you do it is a piece like this where there's a lot of that sort of thing. So a little bit of a baptism by fire, so thanks, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty miraculous that Lavender's able to take this piece and score it for a wind band, and it works really, really well. I think I'm seeing here that it was the original orchestra consisted of 31 players. It was a large Broadway put orchestra, enhanced to include 5 percussionists, a guitarist, and a piano / cellista player. So that's a lot of people. I mean, obviously we have more people in the Wind Symphony, but
sure,
those people are probably 1 to a part, so it's.
If you haven't played the original score, it's extremely difficult. I played the Read One book, and I actually condensed it because it calls for flute, piccolo, clarinet, bass clarinet, oboe, alto, tenor, bass, and I'm just like, I don't have room, I don't have the space for what I'm doing. So I did a lot of just like substitutions, and okay, I'm going to play the open part on whatever. So yeah, there's just a lot going on, and a lot of the solo parts from the original made its way into the orchestral suite, and actually made it into this arrangement by Paul Lavender too. What a great job by Paul Lavender. This is not something that he is necessarily known for doing, is this level of music.
No, you tend to see Paul Lavender's name on like younger band music and lighter band music, but he's definitely flexing his muscles here with a pretty significant task, and I think he does a pretty darn good job.
Yes, he did.
So, all right, well, let's listen to, I don't know what we're going to listen to. We got a lot of choices.
Some part of West Side Story, it'll be great.
Yeah, we got a lot of choices, so we'll find something good for you. So here's a little bit of Paul Lavender's arrangement of Leonard Bernstein's symphonic dances from West Side Story.
All right, you listened to some part of Symphonic Dances by West Side Story. I'm not entirely sure what Matt has selected to put that back when we go back and edit this, but we wanted to wrap up this podcast today by saying thank you for joining us, and thank you for continuing to social distance and make good decisions in this completely bizarre time that we find ourselves in. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss on future podcasts right now. Since our performing schedule is a little bit up in the air, we just kind of have to take that a week at a time and see what happens with that. Our future plans include doing deep dives into different genres of wind ensemble music. So we might do a podcast specifically on marches. We might do one specifically on ballads or transcriptions. We've got a lot of ideas and a lot of time to to keep ourselves busy. But Matt's going to finish off and talk a little bit about where you can find information about the St. Louis Wind Symphony and everything else. Matt, what you got?
Well, as normal, we can always access our website and our Facebook page for information on what's going on with the Wind Symphony. We're going to be doing our best to keep that updated as as things evolve. Right now, we have some dates for June on the website. At this point, those have not been officially canceled. We're still waiting to find out more. So just obviously keep your ear to the ground and be listening for updates on that stuff. But as always, you can find on our website information about the band. You can find our YouTube channel that has YouTube recordings of us playing. So even if you can't hear us live, you can still listen to us on YouTube. And if you're really missing the sound of both mine and Lisa's voice, you can listen to all of our previous podcasts, which have now been posted on our website and are also on YouTube as well. So you can listen to those when you're, out gardening or whatever you're doing, working on at home. You can hear us talk about band. That's about all I got here. I've enjoyed doing this podcast in my garage.
I have really enjoyed you waxing philosophic about band music to the accompaniment of what sounds like a million birds in your yard.
There are birds out here, and it's nice. I'm glad that you're hearing the birds and not the trash truck or anything else that's driven by, or the planes flying over. We've actually gotten pretty lucky. You've got to hear the good stuff. So
it's been very pleasant. Yeah. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and pay attention to what we're going to present sometime later on the next month or so.